Hello, friends. This is Marilyn from tarotclarity.com, and I'd like to thank those of you who participated in my little online survey about what video you'd like to see next. And the winner was the option of doing a reading using two different decks, but the same cards from both decks, to see how the interpretation of the reading might vary. And I figured maybe I would do a few of these. Now, for those of us who use TDM style, and that could include the French TDM, the Tarot of Marseille, as well as the Tarot of Milan, as we call those from northern Italy, would be familiar with the Jean Noblet Tarot deck. And so for this demonstration, I've chosen to use the Artisan Tarot. And for those of you who do not use TDM, undoubtedly you are familiar with the Rider-Waite-Smith deck. And so for this, I chose to use the one put out by Mueller, or AGM Urania, which happens to be written in German. Now, I have a question, and but I couldn't decide how to decide which 5 cards to use, because I like things to be spontaneous. I don't like things to be canned. You know, I like to do things genuinely. And it occurred to me that a number of years ago, I bought these dice, I guess, with tarot things on them, you know. And I never use them. I don't even know why I bought them. But it occurred to me that this would be a perfect occasion to use them, to pick the cards that I would use for the demonstration, and still be spontaneous and not being, you know, partial to either deck. I wouldn't use either deck, you know, for the which 5 cards I'd use. So the question that I have in mind is fictitious. It's not one for myself or anyone else. But it's one that I think is common enough that most people can relate to, and that is a person comes to me, let's say it's a man, and he has this great opportunity that he is being presented with that seems to be everything he wants emotionally and monetarily, and yet he has this sense of dread about it. It could be anything from a job opportunity to a really great price, to, you know, for flying in an airplane to a country he always wanted to go to. But whatever it is that he thinks he offers him, you know, either a great price or, you know, a great incentive monetarily, and also that it makes him, you know, he thinks it will bring him great joy. He's just got this sense of dread, and he wants to know if his dread is something he needs to pay attention to, or if it's just like, you know, inner doubts, you know, like sabotaging his himself. Okay, so with that question in mind, and I think it's important to pose the question before we randomly pick which cards it might be. And I'm shaking them up in the bag. There's not a whole lot of room in the bag, but I am kind of smushing them around. So let's plop out 5 cubes. So here we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9 coins. And we'll put them in the same order that they fall, the cards. Ace of coins. Give it a good shake, a good mix, which I already did before. 2 of cups. One, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 swords. And 5 coins. So let me go off camera, lay the cards, both rows of cards, to match these, and we'll see what we get. Now it's uncanny because as I was going through the process of pulling the respective cards from each deck, it occurred to me that the dice that were delivered mimic exactly and validate exactly the question. They bear out the question if you look at it. We have the sense of something that will bring great well-being, which is reflected in both cards, both of these cards. The 10 of coins, in this case, the 10 of pentacles, represent something of great, satisfaction, great material comfort, a great sense of physical well-being, presented in the form of some type of opportunity. Now this is new, the 2 of cups, being a partnership, maybe this, if it's a business venture, maybe it's a partnership with someone, or going into business with someone, or a new company of some sort, or maybe going on a trip or a vacation with a loved one. So that is implied, but it is implied maybe with the question itself, and this maybe is a greater nuance. And then we have 10 swords, which shows an escalation of some sort. In this case, an escalation of something that goes awry, or something that, just doesn't end well. And this is like the end of something. We have a pair of 10s in this reading, right? We have, a 10 of positivity and then a 10 of possible negativity. I mean, I don't like to think of the cards as negative. I mean, the 10 of swords doesn't have to mean this. The 10 of swords doesn't have to mean what this looks like, that the 10 of swords can mean, just the end of a pursuit, or the end of aggravation, or the end of communication, right? And then we have 5 coins. So we end the spread with exponentially less than when we started it. So the idea, I mean, it's crazy how just pulling these dice mimic the question and validate the question. Now, it's interesting that maybe the female pope or the high priestess didn't pop up, and it occurred to me that when I formed the question, that if the high priestess or the female pope would pop up, it would be a clue. Listen to your gut, listen to your instincts. But it just seems that these cards, in both cases, pretty much mimic the question and validate the question. That, yeah, you could probably listen to your instincts, because it starts out the way you see it. Maybe the thing it gives us more than what the question was, that maybe it seems like a great partnership to go to do with someone else, but that maybe it doesn't end up being all that you had hoped for. It doesn't necessarily mean that there's calamity, right? We don't have to assume that it's great calamity, because there are no cards here of great calamity. There are no cards of the higher trump order or the triumph cards to suggest any type of calamity. But it could be more like a nuisance thing. So the severity, or the warning, I think, is more severe when we use the Rider-Waite-Smith, deck. And it's less pronounced when we use, a TDM deck. I agree that they both seem to indicate that it won't end up maybe as well as you expect it. And you end up half as well as when you entered, but it might be kind of like an eye-opener, So there's, to some degree, they're very similar, the readings with the 2 different deck of cards, but the severity, I believe, is less with the TDM. I don't think it's great. It will lead to great calamity. It will just lead to a sense of it not being, everything that the expectation had been going in. So let's do another few, and hopefully we'll get very distinct, interpretations. But isn't it uncanny how the cards that were chosen, really validate and play out the question? I mean, that's just crazy. But that's how tarot is. Tarot often will validate a person's concerns. Like, this is validation. Yeah, it might not be everything you think you're hoping it is. It seems better than it is going in than when it's finished. Okay, so let's try a couple more. Okay, friends, so I took all these dice out. I laid them on the table. I mixed them up, flipped them around, did all kinds of mumbo jumbo with them, and then put them back in the sack, because this is the only way that I know that I can think of to, randomly choose cards that aren't associated with either deck, really. And another fictitious question, not one from any client I've ever had, nor one that is present in my own life. The question I came up with is a neighbor who is concerned about the well-being of children that she sees that live on her block. So she's concerned about something. She gets a bad vibe about the parents or something like that. And she wants to know, she wants to know what she should do about it. Now, whenever there's a question like that, and questions like that do pop up, whenever children are involved or the well-being of children are involved, without even going into the cards, I would say, when children are involved, you should go to a higher authority and discuss it with them for their advice. You could either go to Child Protective Services and, express your concerns. Certainly, I wouldn't leave it to the interpretation of random cards, on a table whenever children are involved. And then there are other certain instances like health or, financial issues, right? But having said that, and it probably wasn't a great question to pose as a demonstration, but you will get questions like this. But I would always, before I would even offer, my reading, I would say, red flag, go immediately and discuss this with a professional or, someone else, who can give you guidance in this regard. However, maybe she just wants to, put her fears to rest, or maybe she wants to know, she wants validation if it's something that she should pursue moving forward. Okay, so let's pick 5 random cards from the sack. Okay, we have 3 swords. Oh, okay, we'll do it. This one comes first. 1, 2, another 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So it looks like we have 10 coins again. Oh, so this must be the female pope or the high priestess. So listen to your instincts, right? Okay, and then we have another 3 batons. Always look for similarities, right? And then these are a little bit on the abstract side. Okay, so this must be the Hermit. So let me pull the 5 cards from each deck to see what we come up with visually from each deck. Okay, so I've laid the cards from each of the respective decks, and no matter which deck I would be using to interpret this spread, the first card I would remark on front and center is the female pope and the high priestess. And I mentioned it in the previous reading we did about listening to your instincts, right? And, this front and center, we have a triumph, a card of the higher order. So we have a trump card or a triumph card, right? Front and center. And, when I teach and, when I express, my readings and demonstrations such as this, my first thing that I should say is that the way I interpret the cards is in relation to the question. Any of these cards can mean a number of things, right? It's all in the context of the information, of the request being given. So when there is a sense of something not being right in a question, and the female pope would appear, among other things that she could represent, one of the primary things that I would encourage the person to do would be to listen to their instincts and listen to their gut, right? So that would be the first thing I would say, no matter which deck I was using, just the appearance of the female pope. I apologize moving forward if you hear a male voice in the background, but we have painters coming to the house today and they're pretty chatty, so you'll probably hear their conversation. Okay, now, in the context of the question, let's read these cards and, each row individually as they present themselves in the story. So the first card here is, a suggestion of, something that's heartbreaking or something that is, a matter of the heart, which is maybe somewhat painful. And it's followed by the card of the happy home. So we have a sense, again, mimicking the question, a sense that something is not right, or there is some heartbreak that is occurring in what appears to be a happy home. Now, it's interesting and it's worth commenting on, because we saw it in the first spread and we see it probably in a lot of readings that are done, is that the cards have an uncanny way of really addressing the issue, addressing the question. And it's just a remarkable thing. And then the person has some instincts, or the questioner has some concern, or her radar is on, regarding this. Ultimately, the final card in the context of the question is a card of counsel, to move forward with counsel. So listen to your instincts, put it out there, and get some counsel. Put your concerns out there, and get some counsel. Now, again, with the TDM deck, my first instinct is to tell them, listen to your instincts. Now, I'd be more inclined to notice the pair of threes with TDM than I am here. And so there's a dynamic of three here. Now, I don't get the sense, necessarily of a broken heart or heartache or anything like that. But since this Three of Swords is, three is a dynamic number. It's an odd number. It's an unsettling number. And the Suit of Swords in the context of the question could be communication. It could represent break silence, right? So it's not the same message as we would get from this image. But, it is a card that in the context of the question could suggest to break the silence. We have the sword penetrating this contained shape, right? So we have this, perfect little enclosed shape that something is piercing through. And when you see something piercing through, in the context of a question like this, it could represent break the silence. The Ten of Suits, the Ten of Coins, as I understand it, is, well-being, right? Like the ultimate of well-being. But sometimes with the number 10 comes a new cycle. And so something breaks. So you break the cycle, right? You break the silence, right? It may shatter, it may cause an end to what appears to be something that appears to be something different on the surface, right? We have follow your instincts. Again, 3 batons. I interpret the batons, the suit of batons, as something that, as a suit that can represent social order, social inclination. It could be, a family dynamic. It could be a work dynamic. It could be social services dynamic. And it's another 3, right? So again, we have a sense of involving a third party, right? Break the silence, involving, someone in the social network. And in the context of the question, again, with the Hermit, it would be, seek counsel, seek wisdom. In both cases, the Hermit is looking in the direction of everything you've said, everything the querent or the questioner has asked, right? So the counselor will look at everything, I think, objectively, and be the one who would ultimately have the wisdom, but that the questioner should listen to his or her instincts, and break the silence and take it to a third party. Now, the cards that differ the most then in these two spreads would be the pair of threes, right? My understanding of the Three of Swords and Three of Batons vary, even though it's the same question, but my interpretation and my understanding of how it relates to the question varies depending on which of these decks I use. And for the sake of magic, let's do a third example of having a question and using these two decks to see in what ways the interpretation may vary. Okay, so now for the third reading, I've decided not to do one that has anything to do with emotions, or following hunches or anything like that. For this third one, I've decided to just do a reading that a lot of people ask for. It's just an overview of, say, the next 6 months, right? Oh, excuse me for the cough. I'm coming down from pneumonia, so anyway, so let us pull. And when the camera was off, I put all the dice on the table. I mixed them up. I flipped them over. I did all kinds of mumbo jumbo with them, and I think we're well mixed. Let's pull five. Pull five. Okay, we have the Justice card. The Five of Swords. One, two, three, four, five, 6 batons. Now, although these dice are not connected to Rider-Waite-Smith or TDM directly, in a sense, they seem to be more reminiscent of TDM, don't they? Because, and I guess in a way, you could just read the dice, What is this? So I'm guessing that this is probably the valet or the page of coin. So maybe in a way they're not as random, they're not as impartial because they really only have the suit and symbol. And then this one is the Four of Swords. So let me pull the respective cards from each deck and give me a couple minutes. Okay, so interpreting the first row first using TDM, the first thing I'm struck by is that we have the Justice card and 2 sword cards, right? So with there being cards of authority, now remember this is a general question, how will the next 6 months go? My first inclination would be to suspect or put out, it seems as though you are currently involved in something that you're waiting to hear from an authority about. Now, it could be a legal matter. It could be, waiting for the terms of a insurance policy to go through, or it could be something as banal as a decision made by, homeowners association, right? It doesn't have to be a legal issue, right? But I would suggest that there's something that is in this questioner's mind regarding the outcome or a decision that will be made based on their behalf. And as I said, I got that from the 3 sword cards, which, the 2 sword cards, and the Justice card. Now, bear in mind that, for me, the swords can also represent decisions or aggression. It depends on the context of the question. And so since there was no real specific question, just a generality, my instinct is telling me to go in this line because there are three that suggest, either legal or decision or some type of authority who's making a decision. And this card also makes me think of them waiting on a decision because, as I mentioned in the other spread that we did, where the one of the swords was piercing through this safe little spot, like we're waiting for news to break, right? 5 is an unsettling number, so we're sort of anticipating with anxiety, a certain amount of anxiety and stress. So it's kind of like there's a certain amount of stress that this person has regarding an issue. Now, front and center is the 6 of batons, and 6 is a perfect number. So the suggestion, batons for me could represent a social order or activity or action. And so it seems to me that ultimately, or, before the 6 months is up, perhaps it's a decision. Or maybe it would just be that the matter will die down. So if it's not a decision that will be made in the person's favor by a group of individuals, the social order of individuals who maybe is in a position of making a choice or a decision or a judgment on something, it seems like it would probably be in the person's favor. And the end of the 6-month period ends with, I apologize for the pause. I just was going into a coughing fit. I think I was saying that the sequence, the end of the 6 months, kind of ends with kind of the individual maybe having their way. Now, 4 is not a perfect number, but it's an even number, and we see that there's something that's contained almost preciously, as though a secret. And we have the valet of coin looking at it. Now, in this case, I don't get the sense that the valet is presenting the coin. He's just somebody who maybe represents the home, like maybe a child or if it happens to be in the workplace, an individual who is subservient to the questioner in the workplace. It could be either of those two things. Remember, it's a general question, so you give them general information because that's what they ask, right? But whether it's the home or the workplace, the individual is looking on. This could even be, I don't think it's the individual who's questioning. I think it's either a subservient or a child in either of those two structures that I mentioned, who is preserving maybe the status quo, or is preserving a secret, or is maintaining, I think, like a secret. So, or allowing for the person or the judgment going in their way. So that is how I would interpret this. Essentially, there's some kind of judgment or some kind of decision that will probably preoccupy the questioner for a period of time. It's causing a certain amount of anxiety. Before the 6 months is up, I think it will be resolved favorably for them. And either this is a completely new issue or it's just part of the equation that by the end of the 6-month period of time, maybe they have an alliance or an understanding, or the status quo has been maintained, or there may be a need to keep a secret, or a new secret, or information that might not be common knowledge may be presented to the individual. Now, you might say, well, that's a stretch based on these cards, but I am the interpreter, and that's how I'm seeing it in the context of the general question. So now let's take a look at the same cards, but with a different deck above. Again, we see the spread begins with the Justice card, which could give us the same thought, the same understanding of, a decision being made or justice being served. But here, I don't get the same kind of interpretation that I would with the Five of Swords here. Here, it's like there's an empty victory. There's an empty victory, and then there's a victory, right? If we're looking at the cards, of these cards, right? So there's a need for justice, and there's two opposing concepts here. One of an empty victory, you won the war, but you lost your soul, kind of thing, and then a victor. So there may be in this, with these cards, a sense that there is a judgment being made, or maybe a legal matter where there's some deception, or some not deception, but some underhandedness, which results in victory for the questioner, since they're the one who was asking the question about the next 6 months of their life. So if they are involved in something of a legal nature, it almost looks like in order to get their way, they have to do something underhanded, or they will do something underhanded in order to achieve it. And here, the page of, in this case, Pentacles, who I would think of as someone in the realm of, the workplace or the home, is in this case, unlike the other one who doesn't, to me, this card isn't like offering something, but he just happens to represent either home or work. But this individual is offering like an opportunity or an offering to repose, or to think about what's happening, or to give it, to consider maybe what is playing out here, to pause, put the brakes on, and to like seriously reconsider, or to seriously think, to take an opportunity to think it through. So, in this third example, I think we have, the way I interpret the cards and understand the cards, two different understandings, whereas, this one, well, we're talking about this one, where this one seems that there's something underhanded that the questioner is like participating in. And, I would give them a warning to pause, put the brakes on, and, reconsider whatever it is they're going to be involved in for the next 6 months, to really take pause and to, think about it before progressing in anything that feels like it could be the nature of what I've just described. Now, the one thing that I didn't do for any of these three readings was to do the quintessential reading, which is something I would do for a client, whereby I add up the numbers and then, find a trump card or triumph card that would reflect the numerological assessment. So for both of them they would both be the same. We'd have, well, no, because justice here is 11 and not 8. So we'd come up with different numbers at the end. So let me do the, add them up and for each, and then put the quintessential message on the end, just so I get one reading in with that, with that aspect of doing a quintessential message. And I do apologize for all the coughing, but I guess I'm not over it yet. Okay, so I've tallied up the numerical aspects of each of these spreads with these different decks, and we come up with different numbers because 8 justice is not the same number in both decks. For the Rider-Waite-Smith version, the quintessential message is Emperor. So we see essentially that the spread begins and ends with authority, and it's stern authority. And so I would definitely take this as a validation that the person tread careful. This would be more of an admonishment to be very careful in their dealings, within the next 6 months. Now, with this one, I don't get the sense that the individual is involved in something shady, more that there is, something that will occupy, the questioner's time, or for this period of time, that has to do with a judgment or decision being made. And interestingly, the magician is the number that pops up for the quintessential message of this spread, which does suggest an underhandedness or something going on behind the scenes that maybe the questioner is not aware of. But that, I don't believe, relates to the questioner integrity or the questioner's behavior as much as it has to do with, what goes on behind the scenes in the process of this decision being made, right? In fact, this individual may have a lot to do with, influencing or throwing something in the mix, right? That ends up being ultimately in the individual's favor. Now you say, well, with such different, understandings or interpretations of the cards, which reading is correct? Well, the correct reading is the one that you legitimately do for the questioner, right? These were fictitious questions, right? And if a person is coming to you or me or anyone else, they're trusting that the message is going to come through us, right? And if we go into our meditative purpose and when we handle and mix the cards and we go through all that, our understanding is that we're connecting with whatever it is that's out there, and we're channeling it through our own, inner understanding of, how to meaningfully interpret the cards. So the interpretation that I give with this meaning is legit for this individual. It's the message they need to hear. And if someone else did the same exact question with the same exact cards, this is the message that they would get, because maybe at that period of time, this is, what they need to hear, right? So I wouldn't, concern myself about that at all. I mean, the cards can come up with any number of configurations, and the person who's interpreting the cards is the one who relays the message that the individual has to hear. And I wouldn't concern myself about why the messages are different, because this is a fictitious thing. This isn't even a real thing, This is just a fake question for demonstration purposes, and I wouldn't even occupy my concern about that. And at any given time, with a general question like this, what do the next 6 months, what do the next 6 months look for me? Either one of those messages could apply to an individual, and I'm sure they can put it in the context of their life and recognize the ways that either of these interpretations could apply to them. The cards themselves aren't necessarily to give us future projections as much as it is to tell us what to look out for, right? Or what pitfalls to avoid, or what insight we might go into a situation that we hadn't thought of before. Ultimately, we do what we want to do, whether the cards say anything or not, So we're not looking to predict the future so much as we're just trying to give people insight that they might not have normally thought of for themselves. And however they take that insight and apply it will be the thing that determines the outcome. So I hope this has been insightful and helpful to you. And until next time, friends, peace and stay well, as always.